a mechanized assault can feel like a sure thing at first. Because once a heavy tank starts rolling, most people expect the line to break. In Ukraine, that belief can die in seconds, because the battlefield now has a second layer that many still underestimate. This report tracks a Russian T-90M, described as the spearhead of a push, moving forward after hours of fire had shaken the defenses. Infantry stayed close, because armor at the front looks like safety, and safety creates speed. But the most dangerous weapon in this moment was not another tank, and it was not a missile fired from far away. It was a small machine in the low sky, feeding live video to operators who could wait, choose, and strike with patience. One clean hit at the right angle can turn a spearhead into a roadblock, and the shock can spread faster than the flames. That is the part most headlines skip because it sounds too simple, yet it keeps happening. Now watch how this push changed course, step by step. If this kind of clear, no-fluff modern warfare reporting matters, like, share, and subscribe to Military Force. In the middle of fighting, a Russian tank described as a T-90M led the spearhead of an assault, pushing deep into Ukrainian ground after hours of artillery fire and creating a breakthrough on the line. The move looked decisive at first because armor at the front can turn noise and dust into the feeling that resistance is already fading. After long shelling, positions shift and gaps appear. So a fast armored thrust can suddenly find an opening that was not there earlier. Not for long, though. For the crews, that opening can feel like permission to press, because pausing in the open invites quick punishment and shapes the formation. The formation was described as moving like a drill, because the tank rolled ahead and kept firing, while infantry followed close behind. Its gunfire gave cover and direction at the same time, so foot soldiers could advance with fewer pauses and less hesitation. A lead vehicle also set the pace, because it pulled the group forward and made stopping feel like failure. In that kind of push, the goal was not a careful crawl, but a quick bite of ground that forced the defender to react late and lose control of spacing. That is how a narrow breach can start to feel like a bigger collapse. The tempo in this moment depended on carry-through, because armor creates the sense of shielding even when the protection is incomplete. When a tank is in front, troops behind it often feel safer crossing open space, since steel seems to reduce exposure and keep the line moving. That feeling can hide risk because confidence tends to replace spacing and steady scanning, especially when radio calls are short and urgent. Engines stay high, voices stay sharp, and the group leans into speed, hoping speed itself will solve the problem. Yet the faster a unit commits, the harder it becomes to change direction when the situation shifts. The atmosphere around the push was thick with smoke, the roar of motors, and the fog of war that makes early success look bigger than it really is. If the tank met little immediate resistance, the mind filled the silence with a simple story. The breach is working. Dust clouds and shattered cover also blocked clear sightlines, so threats that were quiet did not feel urgent, even if they were already close. Under that pressure, crews focused on what they could see ahead, because the front arc is where classic ambushes live. So the assault could feel almost triumphant for a short window, even while danger was building outside normal vision. A limited breakthrough can be inflated into a tactical opportunity, especially if the defender cannot cut the lead element in the first minutes. Once the spearhead crosses a key line, the attacker may try to pour more forces through, because momentum can turn a crack into a corridor. That corridor can threaten supply routes and force retreats, since defenders may have to fall back to avoid being split. But if the tip is stopped, the whole shape of the push changes, because infantry loses its moving shield and the column loses its timing. That is why many units gamble on forward motion, since hesitation invites strikes and confusion. In many assaults, the riskiest moment is not the first contact, but the minute when the lead vehicle believes it has beaten the defense and relaxes its scan. That is when spacing collapses, radios get crowded, and the column starts to bunch up around the same track or gap. A single disabled vehicle can then become a choke point. forcing following units to slow down or detour into open ground. Even a brief stop can break the rhythm of fire support because guns and infantry no longer move on the same beat. And right as the assault believed it had opened the door, the watch from above began to tighten every option the crew still had. As the tank and its infantry escort kept closing in, a Ukrainian FPV scout was described as spotting the T-90M from above and staying with it, while a live video feed ran back to a control team behind the line. That detail matters because the first side that can see clearly usually gets to control the rhythm, even when the ground fight is loud and confusing. From the air, smoke and dust hide less, and a moving vehicle becomes a clear outline that can be followed for minutes, not just seconds. The drone does not need to win a duel by itself, because simply keeping the target in frame can shape every decision that follows. That is where the ground story starts to slip out of the crew's hands. The decisive factor is that the feed is live, because it turns movement into data that can be read, compared, and acted on instead of guessed at from the dirt. A crew inside armor feels speed and vibration, but it cannot easily judge spacing, route changes, or who is bunching up behind it when visibility is poor. An overhead view can track the path, note when the vehicle slows, and see where infantry collects near cover, and those details can be passed along fast. If the tank drifts toward a gap, the camera sees the gap. And if the escort piles into the same lane, the camera sees that too. Even without firing, that steady picture shortens reaction time and removes surprise, so the assault is still moving but the clock is already being run by the observer. Source descriptions also place the operators in a concealed position miles away, which shows how modern combat can be directed from far outside the blast zone. The team does not need to smell fuel or hear engines to understand the move, because the screen gives angle, distance, and pace with brutal clarity. Calm voices and short callouts can do more than shouting, since clarity helps a pilot keep the target centered and avoid wasting power on sharp corrections. Distance also protects the crew, because the risk is carried by the aircraft, not by the people holding the controls. With that calm control in place, the choice of when to act becomes a weapon. The live feed also becomes a shared map, because one set of eyes can guide others without exposing more troops. Operators can call out turns, spacing, and brief openings on the vehicle, and that reduces guessing under stress. Signals can still be disrupted by jamming or terrain, so clean seconds feel precious today. Once a target is being tailed like this, a strike becomes less about luck and more about waiting for the right moment and the right approach. The FPV can loiter until the tank turns, until the rear opens, or until the escort drifts out of position. And then it can commit with purpose. Patience is deadly here because a few seconds can reveal a better angle than a rushed dive. This pressure flips initiative, since the attacker must keep moving without knowing what the other side is seeing, while the defender can wait and choose. And while the commander scans the road ahead, the worst threat is arriving from the one direction that is hardest to watch. While the crew focused on threats in front and tried to stay linked with the infantry escort, the danger from above was not spotted in time, which gave an FPV drone the space it needed to close in. That happens in modern armor fights because the human brain still defaults to old threats, and those old threats usually live on the ground. A tank crew is trained to fear anti-tank teams, hidden launchers, and ambush fire from tree lines, rooftops, and trench edges, so their eyes and optics naturally search the front arc. When the gun is firing and the vehicle is moving, the crew's attention is already split, and that split is where the sky can slip through. That is the first crack that an FPV team is waiting for. The crew's combat mindset often prioritizes finding anti-tank teams and ground firing points, because those are the classic killers of armor in close fights. A commander scans for flashes, silhouettes, and odd movement, while the gunner checks likely positions and the driver holds speed under stress. At the same time, infantry coordination is not optional, because a tank without close escort can get isolated fast in broken terrain. So radios stay busy and callouts stay short, and every second is spent on threats that can be seen at eye level. That focus is logical, yet it leaves a blind lane that does not feel urgent until it is too late. Once the unit is committed, the workload rises hard because the crew must keep momentum, provide supporting fire, and maintain spacing with friendly troops. In that moment, the tank is not just a weapon, it is also a moving command problem that has to be managed in real time. If the tank slows, it becomes an easy mark for ground weapons, but if it rushes, it can outrun its escort and lose security. So the crew tries to do everything at once, and that makes small, fast, low objects harder to notice. That is why an FPV drone can feel invisible, not because it cannot be seen, but because the crew's attention is already overloaded. Source descriptions capture this gap in a simple way, by noting the commander scanning through optics for anti-tank teams, while the drone threat came from above. Optics are built to find targets on the horizon line, and even good crews can miss something that drops in from a steep angle during smoke and engine noise. The battlefield soundtrack also works against detection, because the roar of motors and gunfire can swallow the high-pitched cues people expect. Add dust and shattered cover, and the sky becomes just another piece of background, not the main danger channel. This is the cognitive trap of drone war. The impact of that blind spot is blunt, because the tank is not defeated at its thickest armor, it is defeated at the moment it loses vertical awareness. Once the attacker cannot control the up-down axis, advanced protection on the front plate matters less than the seconds it takes to react. A drone does not need to outgun the tank. It only needs to arrive at the weak side before the crew can reset its scan and respond. That is also why some armored pushes collapse so fast, because one missed threat can break the formation's confidence and timing in the same breath. And when the distance has been cut to almost nothing, the only thing left is a technical choice, which is where to strike so the tank turns into a roadblock. After choosing the best attack angle, the FPV drone dove in from the rear and aimed at the engine area, which is one of the most dangerous weak points on many Russian tanks. This is not a random choice because the back half of a tank is often less protected during a forward push, and it is also harder for the crew to watch while moving and firing. When a drone comes in low and fast, the key advantage is not size but timing, because the target cannot easily turn its strongest armor toward the threat in time. That sets up a hit that does not need to crack the turret, since it can still break the vehicle's ability to move. That is why the strike path matters more than the blast alone, and it leads straight into the logic of disabling mobility. Hitting the engine compartment is a way to attack movement, because even a tough tank becomes a problem if it cannot drive, reverse, or pivot under fire. A mobility kill turns armor into a fixed object, and a fixed object attracts more danger, since it blocks lanes and becomes an easy reference point for follow-on attacks. If the drivetrain is damaged or a fire starts in the rear, the crew can be forced to stop, and stopping in a watched zone is often worse than taking a risky turn. The pilot was also described as accounting for jamming and for the exact moment to commit, which shows this is not only bravery, but planning under electronic pressure. Signals can drop, screens can freeze, and control can become jerky, so the entry has to be clean and simple when the final seconds arrive. That careful setup is what turns a small system into a precision tool, and it explains why the hit feels sudden to the people on the ground. A drone does not need a long window because it only needs enough time to enter the frame, correct the line, and commit to the strike. So the fight becomes a contest of seconds, where the attacker tries to keep moving while the observer waits for the one angle that cannot be fixed in time. The impact of this kind of strike is bigger than a single vehicle, because it can collapse tempo faster than a long artillery exchange that takes hours to shape the ground. A lead tank is not only firepower, it is direction, because it sets the route, it anchors confidence, and it helps infantry judge when to push. When that spearhead is removed, the assault loses its front, and the escort suddenly has to make choices without the same cover and without the same rhythm. That is why a compact FPV can produce an outsized effect, since it cuts the role of the lead vehicle at the moment it matters most. And once the dive is completed, the consequences do not stay inside the tank, because the shockwave spreads into the escort that was depending on it. The blast was described as ripping into the engine area, starting an intense fire that forced the tank to stop. And that single stop stripped the assault of its main fire platform and its moving shield. In an armored push, a lead tank is more than steel, because it is the center of pace and the source of confidence for the troops walking behind it. Once it halts in the open, the whole scene changes, since a stopped vehicle becomes a fixed point that everyone can see, aim at, and avoid. That is why this moment is not only about damage, but about the sudden loss of motion that the assault depended on. From there, the battlefield begins to punish anything that cannot move. Source descriptions emphasize what followed in physical terms, with flames rising from the rear, thick black smoke, and secondary detonations described like cook-off, that made the area around the tank dangerous. When ammunition or fuel is heating, the crew and nearby infantry cannot treat the vehicle as cover anymore, because fragments and blast pressure can reach them even without a direct hit. Smoke also marks the location like a beacon, so the tank stops being a shield and starts being a signpost for every observer above and every gunner on the ground. In that condition, the safest move is often to get away from the burning hull, which means the escort loses the one piece of cover it expected to follow. So the fire does not stay inside the engine bay. It spreads into the behavior of the whole group. As the tank was neutralized, the Russian infantry escort was described as slipping into disorder, and the forward push slowed as troops had to scatter and look for protection. This reaction is easy to understand because soldiers advance differently when armor is still moving, but they move very differently when that armor is suddenly a burning obstacle. Some troops may drop into nearby cover, others may sprint to new positions, and a few may freeze for a second, since nobody wants to be caught near a cook-off zone. Spacing breaks, simple plans break, and radio traffic gets louder because the unit is no longer acting as one shape. That is how a strike on one vehicle can bend the entire assault's tempo. On the Ukrainian side, the destruction was described as a major morale jolt because it came right after a moment of pressure and retreat. A team that has just given ground can feel like it is losing, yet one successful hit can flip the emotional story in seconds. Instead of "we are being pushed back," the message becomes "we stopped the spearhead," and that shift can raise confidence across nearby positions. It also signals that precision and coordination can beat brute force at the point of contact, which matters in a war where exhaustion is constant. So the effect is tactical and psychological at the same time. This event reinforces a hard reality on the Ukraine battlefield, which is that even advanced tanks like the T-90M can become vulnerable when they are isolated or when low-altitude air defense and close protection are missing. FPV drones do not need to defeat armor everywhere, because they only need one opening in the vertical layer that the crew cannot cover. If there is no nearby short-range screen, no tight overwatch, and no reliable way to deny the low sky, a tank can be hunted like any other vehicle. That is why being modern is not enough, because survival now depends on the system around the tank, not only the tank itself. The impact of a stopped tank is bigger than the loss of hardware, because it breaks formation rhythm and removes the infantry's anchor, which is cover, direction, and a central fire source. When that anchor disappears, the escort becomes exposed, decision cycles slow down, and the assault loses its clean line of movement. And from that point, the question is no longer how powerful the tank is, but whether the formation has a true survival layer under the low sky. This T-90M sequence is not just another battlefield clip, because it shows how the rules of war are changing day by day. A modern tank still matters when it is part of a full system, yet under constant observation its value depends on discipline, escort teamwork, and low-altitude protection right above the formation. In this case, the FPV did not win with raw blast power, because it won with timing, angle, and a smart choice of a weak point that turned the spearhead into a stopped obstacle. That single stop then reshaped the fight, since momentum is fragile and an armored push can lose control faster than it gains ground. The open question is what both sides do after lessons like this sink in. Will Russia build tighter close defense for armor and change how it moves under drones? Or will Ukraine keep raising drone density until heavy vehicles become too costly to risk? Either way, the low sky is now a battlefield, and every convoy move becomes a political and tactical decision today. If this kind of clear modern warfare analysis matters, like the video, share it and subscribe to Military Force.